All right, awesome. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks everyone for being here. I know we have quite a few people joining us live. If you are joining us live, we really want this to be as helpful as possible. So in the chats, I'll also bring up the LinkedIn live as well in case people are streaming on LinkedIn. But if you can let us know if you have any questions concerning your business or where you're at, we're more than happy to try to answer them or trying to be as helpful as possible here in doing so. I'm the MC host, Mike. I'm the community manager here at MFD. MFD is an operations and finance partner for consumer brands. So the M stands for manufacturer, the F stands for finance, and the D stands for distribution. What we really care about running a successful inventory, being a successful inventory platform for consumer brands. Hamad here, who's our head of global supply, he is really talking to a lot of brands and advising them when it comes to their supply chains and various needs. Hamad, thank you so much for being here. And also we have Pranay as well, who's the CEO founder of MFD. Pranay, thanks so much for being here too.
Be here. We live in interesting times.
Yes, these are absolutely interesting times. There is a return in the audio. Seems like, I wonder if it's me. Mike, it's yours. Okay. Let me see what I can do here. Sorry for my
I think it might have just gone away.
Hello? Nope. Still is. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Where is that coming from? I would be surprised if this is picking up. If it's mine picking up. Hello? Oh, it's still. Wait, hold on. Sorry. Do you mind muting yourself for a second? Let me just see if it's me. Hello? 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 Okay. I think it's fine now for me, but I'm not hearing a delay. So maybe it's Hamad. Hamad, is this coming through your computer speakers or your headphones?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you. Oh,
Okay, I think you still have a return.
delay.
Or is it me?
Hello?
Oh, man. Oh, you know what it is? There's two windows open. That's what I think it is. Tell me now.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Yeah. Okay.
Let's do
Great.
it.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks
Wow,
for
26 people in the audience. That's cool.
Yeah, this is great. This is great. Oh, it's back again.
Is it me? Because every time should I just?
Ahmad is
Ahmad
always
is
you,
always
man.
you, man. I'm so sorry. Let me drop and try again.
Thanks for bearing with us, everyone. Hello? Hello? Okay, cool.
I can hear you now. It looks fine.
I think it was Hamad. I think Hamad was the culprit here. Well, let's just start getting into it. There is so yesterday a lot of new tariffs happened. This is probably the most far-reaching tariff policy that we've experienced. I know that some reported it's the most far-reaching that we've had here in the States since the 1930s, which is wild.
1928. Yeah, 1930 and then
right?
1828 before 1828 and then 1930 and now 2025.
So, and as a recap, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pranay and Hamad. And I know that I said this before, but this is part 4 of our tariff webinar series. So we've covered quite a bit of the tariffs thus far leading up. However, of course, we have not covered the ones yesterday. We do these every cadence wise every 2 to 3 weeks because there is so much new happening when it comes to these executive orders and new tariffs happening and even some of the reciprocal tariffs that it's hard to follow what's keeping on. So part of the reason why we have this is just for us to follow as well as a forcing function, as well as for others too, just kind of like a community chat and figuring out what's actually happening and what we think might happen in the future, and also why this is happening too. I have, as I mentioned, I have Hamad here and I have Pranay from MFD. Hamad is head of global supply. Pranay is our CEO. They have been working with SMBs, product companies for 20, 25 years for a long time. And they're still extremely young, both of them. Um, so first of all, what happened yesterday? And Hamad and Pranay, let me know if I'm off here. We have a 10% baseline tariff across the board for countries importing into the U.S. And then we have now tariff hikes 34% on China, 20% on the EU, 46% on Vietnam, and 32% on Taiwan. And and then as well, we also have the duties, the auto import duties coming in at 25% duties on tariffs from China, Canada, and Mexico for auto imports, and that's a lot right there. But those are typically the three main points. Is that right, Perde and Hamad?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand what happened yesterday. 185 countries were imposed tariffs on. So it wasn't just
With the ten
this
percent.
cherry picking, this not just cherry picking this country or that country. Secondly, it's important to understand the methodology they used in this. They essentially took the trade gap, which is you export to, let's say, Vietnam. You export $100 to Vietnam. Vietnam exports $1,000 to you. They took that $900 and then divided by two. That's how they got to 46%. So essentially, what they take is they took the trade deficit between every country in the world and then divided it by two. And wherever the trade deficit was negligible because there wasn't enough happening over a certain threshold, they just put a blanket 10%. So the trade deficit between India and the US is 52%. That's why you see 26%. You see 26% tariff. The trade gap between Vietnam and the US is 92%. So you see a 46% tariff. That's what they did on the tariffs yesterday. So the more important thing here is to understand that this is a completely geopolitical move. This has absolutely nothing to do with trade realities or finance. And this is what I said at the beginning of this conversation. Everything tariff is a political move. He does not care about the business. He does not care about logic. He doesn't care about the rationality. It is a power game. He has imposed tariffs on 185 countries to see who wants to be subservient to the US and who's going to fight US. That's it.
But
So
in
framing this as a commerce transaction or a trade transaction is wrong.
true, absolutely true. I think people are starting to see that if they hadn't already seen that. But the impact, when it goes live, will be to U.S. consumers at a minimum, right? Things like electronics and just everyday things that they normally are imported in here and buy. Like that is a reality once these things go live. Is it? Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, let me put it differently. I think what you're going to start seeing now is groups starting to lobby the government to say, help us make money back.
Yeah.
This is the second step of this process. So there's three steps to the process. The first step is shock. Okay, everybody's prices are going up. What are we going to do with our margins? So the automakers were already told, don't raise your prices. And the automaker said, I'm going to raise them anyways. The second was basically all the consumer products. Sheen team. By the way, he completely destroyed 3-1. I told you guys it was going to happen, and it
Yeah.
happened. Right? In 30 days, no 3-1 anymore. And it's not just from China. Every tariffed
Everywhere.
country.
Yeah.
3-1 has been stopped from every tariff country. So if you thought you could set up a warehouse in South America, you're done.
Wow.
Yeah.
3-1 has
Wow.
been taken out of every tariff country. You know what's not taken out? USMCA. If you're USMCA eligible, you're exempt from the tariff. So the fact that he actually imposed tariffs on Mexico and in Canada is actually just 25%. It's actually cheaper than you basically going all the way to the 3-1 tariff.
So from a if 321's then eliminated across the board,
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
I because it's not just if you're drop shipping, for example, you can't just ship countries now. It doesn't actually
No,
matter.
doesn't matter.
I mean, you know, it's still cheaper, for example,
So
maybe
it's
to
either
do it in different ones,
30% or
but
tariff, whichever's higher.
right, right. I mean, and I also think too. I mean, this is even before the. This is even when we were talking about 321 as well. You also have the Sheins of the world, which are going to be super affected because they do all their
They've
fulfillment
had
out of
they've
China.
had 60 days, 60 to 90 days to prepare for this because that was the bargain. So what happened, I think, in February was lobbyists went to him and said, you know what, we have these massive investments in all these companies. Give us 90 days so we can prepare for this. So he gave them 90 days. And he gave his own team 90 days to prepare for it. Those 90 days are here. May everyone's done.
So from ripple effects, I know that he says and that this is due to you know um, bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. I know we've talked about this a bit, but but it but you don't think it really has anything to do with that? Is that if that's fair to say?
I think that's a very good way to talk about it. But to bring manufacturing back to the US in any meaningful way will take anywhere between 5 and 15 years. Easy. For you to rebuild the entire manufacturing base in the US, which is high automation, high training, completely automated products with even consumer products. Bringing consumer product manufacturing back to the US that are basically high automation things, there's a lot of it that happens, but it's going to take between 5 and 15 years. So what he's doing today, he's doing three things. He's plunging the stock market so that interest rate can go down so he can refinance his debt, in July,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's putting every country into disarray so that they get pressured by the lack of demand from the US. That is basically the US is consumes 34% of global consumer demand is generated in the US. Okay, a third of global consumer demand is generated in the US. By essentially putting a blanket ban on or a blanket tariff on that entire consumer demand, let's just say 34% of global consumer demand divide by two, which is 17% of the actual consumer demand and cost of goods, because let's say it's a 50% cost of goods, and then essentially put a 20% tariff on it average, you're looking about 3.5% of the global GDP in actual tariff costs that he's trying to impose on all these countries. Each one of those countries is going to scramble that needs the US more than US needs them, and he will have a roster of companies that are countries that are like, okay, I'll do whatever the US wants, get my tariff out of here.
So
So
we have
he's doing that geopolitically while he's trying to crash the stock market so his interest rates can go down so that he can refinance US sovereign debt, mostly with the countries who basically don't want tariffs. You don't want my tariffs, buy my debt.
so do you think then more tariff changes are coming because do you think that we're going to see countries behave in that way in terms of actually buying U.S. debt?
Absolutely. I think you're
And
going to
then
see a significant amount of chopping and changing. But I think the world of having standard duties and open borders is gone. He's just accelerating it.
The let me just because we're
So I
gonna.
think it's important to talk a little bit about tactical changes, and there's questions in the chat about, well, what do we do now?
totally. First, Hamad, what are your kind of thoughts versus
Well,
in terms of what Trump is doing?
yeah, I think maybe, and I don't want to know if I don't know if it was a mistake, but when this originally happened during the first Trump administration, and Biden didn't roll back those Section 301 tariffs, what he essentially did was tell the world, um, we're the volatility will exist, right? So now that this has happened in this administration, and let's just say for talk's sake that some of these the volatility still stays, um, even if the other party comes into play and wins elections, whether it's midterm or afterwards, in 4 years, there's no guarantee that the U.S. will revert back to its previous ways. And so that throws the whole globe into chaos. There's a lack of trust. There's more isolationist type agreements. The U.S. becomes very protectionist. And so this idea that, in 4 years, everything will be back to normal, there's no guarantee that that happens. And so that then brings other countries together in these their own coalitions and their own agreements to counter what's happening here. Think about defense providers, defense manufacturing. Think about opposition to or competitors for Starlink, competitors to what other big US manufacturing that has taken place. Just because the US will manufacture in 5 to 10, 15 years doesn't mean that there'll be buyers outside of the US either.
It's fair.
So anyway, so we've got some questions maybe we need
So
to
yeah,
address
I
here.
mean, first of all, like to your point about Biden and not overturning or taking back Trump's tariffs against China, is that then you think the rest of the world is looking at that and saying, you know what, doesn't matter who they have in administration, there's going to be now like tariffs is
Yep.
going to be very very much
Yeah.
part of their of like a big topic of conversation when it comes to what they're thinking
Yeah.
about doing.
Yeah, yeah. I think basically it's like we can't trust these guys, right? They're just too volatile. And so when what I mean by that is like we have to go make plans outside the U.S. that are long term. We can no longer be like long term. We can trust the U.S. in terms of all these trade policies. So I think that's where other countries like Canada and Europe, getting together, China, South Korea, and Japan getting together, and all of this starts to build, right? And so they have their own groups and what have you. So.
Got it.
So,
So
so Kim
we have a number of
and
questions here.
yeah, well, let me just address this, Nikhil and Kim. So to clarify, 34% increase on China was that incremental to the 20%, and then the other one was so if we already have 25 on China imports, then in addition. So basically, yeah, it's my understanding is so we have your regular duty schedule plus the Section 301, which varied from like 7 to 20 some percent. Then this year there was that 20% additional, and on top of that now is 34. So this year alone is 54. So Pranay, that's how I read it. I don't know if you read it differently.
There was 25 in China already, then you had a 20, and then you had 34.
Yeah.
That's 45 plus 34, 79. Plus, don't forget they imposed another tariff because China buys buys oil from Venezuela, so they added another tariff on top of that.
So, so, so if you can imagine, let me just clarify here for everyone. So, uh, this year,
Hmm
54% has been added to anything
hmm
that existed before this year.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to be clear. The 79 is a total of Trump administration one plus current Trump administration.
No, thanks for the clarity there.
Yeah.
That's absolutely wild. Um, and
But
we
remember,
have
but Mike, but remember that difference between the 54 now and 79, that difference was already absorbed by companies across the US before this Trump
yeah
administration came to be.
yeah
So
during the Biden
now so
yeah
now yeah, exactly. So now you are adding another 54%, which just seems crazy, right? Like I've got to add another 54%. So it's another 54% on top of what you were paying before this year. So that is the reality. I believe it goes into effect on the ninth is I think what I read or but
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So that's where we're at.
got it. No, thank
Look,
you.
here's what I think people need to think about. People need to think about three things. I think the first thing you need to think about is now Trump is going to make you think, these tariffs are going to make you think, what is my product made of? And where do those components come from? If I have a wagon that has wheels and a base, where do those wheels and those bases come from? Where does the material come from? Where does the steel come from? Where does the metals come from? Where does all that come from? Because China doesn't make all its raw materials. It buys raw materials from all over the world. It then
Mhm.
processes them into semi-finished products and then turns them into finished products. Would people in the US who have any kind of volume, and when I say any kind of volume, I mean 2 million and up annually, People under $2 million just have to raise prices or figure out how to actually get their margins. Those are the people who are going to be hurt the most. But if you have any type of volume, which is 2 million and up or $1 million and up in selling volume or buying volume, you've got to start figuring out where is my components coming from? Where is the assembly going to happen? And then how do I mitigate that risk by essentially going to four different countries and figuring out what the cost of goods is? See, I said this, I think, I don't know, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. It is no longer about the cheapest price. It is about where you can get the product at the best possible delivered price with the least amount of headache. And so now regulations are going to be the biggest hedge in arbitrage. India just got a 26% tariff. That's it. So if you had steel and aluminum that could be made in India, and you basically moved to India, and India's price was even 20% higher, chances are India was suffering before. And Narendra Modi has been basically sucking up to Donald Trump and his entire family like no one's business because he knows this is his opportunity to destroy China in the global market. India, Brazil, those sorts of countries are basically going to come in and figure out I can probably charge 20% higher prices than China could, but still get access to the US market. And now you're going back to the 80s and the 70s because remember, the tariffs that they started in 1930 didn't wash out till 2004 when WTO came in.
Mhm.
The 85 years it took for those tariffs to get out, and only took 20 years of free trade for the tariffs to get out again.
Do you think in terms of disrupting supply chains, like on our podcast Recog, we've talked to quite a few entrepreneurs that work with in terms of manufacturing their products, it's fairly turnkey in terms of the actual manufacturers kind of buy all the raw ingredients, do all like the buys on behalf of the company, and then of course charge premium for that. Do you think that this is like a cause for companies to maybe actually own more of their supply chain and in terms of like those decisions more, just because you have to be so careful when it comes to where you're actually buying the actual ingredients from?
Yes, because I think it's more important for them to know what their product is made of and where it's coming from, so they can actually understand how to get as close as possible to their landed cost where they can basically give the smallest margin increase to the customers and buyers. It doesn't mean that they're going to escape the entire margin increase completely. But if you can basically start figuring out how to telescope to your customers, because remember now, all brands can do is go out to consumers and say, we're in this together. So your customers have to be told, this is your current price. This is where the margin increase is coming from. This is what we basically think we can increase the price to. The idea of that, a $10 product was sold for $25, and then that $25 was sold for $50. So now if you increase the price from $10 to $15, it had to be sold for 30 and then retail for 60, is completely gone out of the window. Because if a retailer increased prices from 50 to $60, now they would lose 80% of their customers because now no one can pay $60. Is there an echo? Something happened.
Yeah, something happened.
Hamad, this is you.
I think it might be you, Hamad.
All right, there you go. So I think we'll stop talking when you talk because I think you're in a closed room where I think the thing is echoing. But right now, I think you have to think about where my components come from, how do I assemble that product, and how can I sell it for the finished product into the US for the cheapest price? Because remember, one more thing is really important. If labor and assembly is the biggest cost of your product, and the components are cheap, and you bought the components, you could pay the tariff on your components on Chinese components. So let's talk about a PCB or talk about electronic product. If you get those components from South Korea or from China, and those components and those batteries basically were, I don't know, 50 cents or $1 on a $10 product, and let's just say putting the product together and assembling them was $4 out of the product. You don't need to pay 79% tariffs on that $4. You just pay it on the components and figure out how to do it nearshore for $2. Because remember, if it used to be $1 to do it in China, now it's $3 to do it because of the finished product. And so instead of doing the component assembly there, you figure out where you can do the component assembly for a lower price. And so now you're bringing components for a certain price, doing it like a finished good. So you've turned every supply chain into this broken up kind of auto parts supply chain where you do one activity in one country, another activity in another country, and now the together product actually works out to be 30% cheaper than buying it finished from China or 40% cheaper than finished from China. And then you're still doing a rate hike, but you have a fighting chance to succeed inside the world.
So it seems like these, because remember when we first talked, Pranay, about how if you want to get out of China with supply chain, when you talk to companies, be prepared to pay 30% more.
Yes,
And now it seems like this is now enough tariffs against China
that's it.
where now actually that you're gonna want to move out of China. Period. I mean, obviously this is like dependent on the product, but like these tariffs now are high enough where actually that 30% that you were talking about roughly. I know this is all rough, but that now is negligible.
Trump is not going to bring his tariffs down on China unless China buys his debt.
Yeah,
China buys the debt, he'll bring the tariff down by 50% because now he has created a brand new bargaining chip that never existed before.
got
You
it.
talk about IP transfer, technology transfer, operations transfer, production. He'll tell China, you have to set up factories in my country. You've got to basically bring in employees to work inside the US. We're going to basically train Americans. You've got to hire 50% Americans and you can bring in 50% immigrants. But you've got to buy my debt and you've got to start manufacturing in the US and finish products in the US. And that's it.
Makes sense. Hamad, anything to add on your end too? I will go on mute.
Now we'll go on mute too.
Are you guys hearing an echo now or no? We're good? Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on here. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of what's happening, like this notion that, should I move my supply chain from China to, let's just say Vietnam, because we got that question last time too, is like, hey, should I move to Vietnam? Well, the difference between the two countries now is very small, right? And so you have to calculate whether or not the difference, which I think might be, was it 49 versus, what did we say, 54? So is that 6% difference worth it to move your supply chain? And by the way, like the volatility of this, maybe you just stay put because number one, the difference isn't that great for you to move on it right away. And secondly, moving it will take time and cost you tons of money, depending on the size of your supply chain. Depending on where you would want to move it, I would, if it's Vietnam, I would at this point, at this juncture, I would just stay put. That's my 2 cents on that.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point, Hamad. Pranay, I know you have to jump to a call,
Yeah.
so Hamad can end it, and I can take it from here. But thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. And by the way, I want to answer Kim's question where she says, do we really think Americans want to bring factories and manufacturing back to America? It's just Trump's view. I think that America needs manufacturing a lot more than the whole world needs American consumer demand. I think that America needs to become a manufacturing hub, but for certain items, not for everything. They should basically create this federation of American countries that can do low budget manufacturing and high budget manufacturing. They can do low cost and automated manufacturing. So if you could have a constellation of 50 countries that basically are in the free trade zone with Trump, with America, then you can get them to do the low cost manufacturing and you could do the high end automated manufacturing. And that free trade is a closed circuit, not a new circuit. Trump is basically trying to rewrite the entire world order in the world, in the country, in the entire political world order. And that he will do through trade, because trade is how he can basically exert pressure on all these countries, saying you won't have free access to the country. I will invest in your country for the low cost manufacturing. You basically come in and do the high cost manufacturing for me, and then that's how we will basically bring the US manufacturing back on track. He doesn't want $50 an hour jobs. He wants $500 an hour jobs in the US. And those $500 an hour jobs will come from, $50 humans automating $1,000 products. So that's just my 2 cents to Kim's question. Yes, we want high quality manufacturing jobs, and the low quality manufacturing jobs should go to countries that basically can get free trade access to the US because they're willing to do whatever the US tells them. In the past they were called vassal states, stuff like that. Kim, candy is a high margin product. So if you manufacture candy in the US, you should be fine because anything that can be automated, it doesn't matter whether the cost is low or high. It's about whether the output per human is high enough. If your humans can basically manufacture $1 million of candy a year, a month, and you basically pay $100,000, you have a 10x output in productivity and you've automated it, you should be just fine.
No, I appreciate that. Also, just saying, giving clarity in terms of what you think jobs or even opportunities that Trump wants in the U.S. versus not, and also which kind of countries or types of countries that he actually wants to work with, that can actually work with him for the jobs that we don't actually want in the U.S. or that he doesn't want
Yep.
when it comes to manufacturing. Per
All right,
Nathan,
guys, I'm going to jump.
yeah,
I'll talk to you
see ya.
soon. Bye.
Yeah, yeah.
Take
Thank
care.
you for your
Bye.
time. In terms of, are you talking about U.S. debt or Trump's debt? We're talking about U.S. debt from Leah. Um, and would the 10% baseline tariff be taken away once the reciprocal tariffs take effect on 4/9? The 10%. I would imagine that Hamad, I don't know if you have any clarity on this. You do. Okay, cool. If you want to go, I have thoughts, but if you want to go for it.
Do you want to mute?
Oh yes.
Okay. So would the 10% baseline tariff be taken away once the reciprocal takes effect? So first of all, the whatever baseline is, so the baseline is actually what he's adding, a basically layer of 10% foundation minimum. And then anything greater than that, there's the whole schedule that he's released on his big on the placard that he was showing yesterday. So on 4/9, that 10% will take effect. So I hope that provides some clarity. So on when this actually goes into effect on 4/9, the countries that have that 10% will go into effect. The countries that have 49% will go into effect. The countries that have 26% will go into effect. So all of that goes into effect. Once those countries come to the negotiating table is when these may or may not come off. That these tariffs may or may not be removed, depending on how that negotiation takes place. You should probably start seeing a line at the White House of international world leaders that are going to be basically brought to the table in order to help negotiate this way. Those that want to. So I hope that answers that question.
I also just have a question for you, Hamad. 34%, or sorry, 32% on Taiwan. Why does that make sense to do? Because as well, a lot of these countries are, allies of the U.S., like the EU, 20%. But Taiwan produces chips, and supplies us with so many chips, and there's a lot of kind of uh, uh, there's a lot of uh, let's say between China and the U.S., like a fight over Taiwan in terms of what Taiwan should be in the future, if that makes sense. Um, why do you think that, because I would imagine we want to maintain very good relationships, very strong relationships with Taiwan, because it is a pretty strategic, important power for us, or nation for us to be allied with. I don't know if you have any takes on that.
So I would say it doesn't matter how close of an ally you are to the United States currently. The rhetoric and the actions are ones which it just basically wants to look. If you want protection, let's say from a another country. I'm trying to be careful with my words here. Then come to the table and let's talk what that means. Let's talk about what that would mean and what that would cost, right? And so I think Eason has said that chips may be exempt. So I don't know. I haven't wasn't able to look at that particularly. But let's just assume other goods, right? Electronics, for example, that come from Taiwan. So I think that's what that is meant to do. There are plenty of strong allies of the United States that are on the not so friendly list right now. And I think Canada is, the biggest surprise at the beginning for everyone to see that happen. So, like I said, it could be Taiwan, it could be anybody, man. But at this point, it's like it's all open season.
That's very fair. I just would have thought, just based off like the strategic of Taiwan and kind of how important Taiwan is when it comes to relationship between China and the U.S. But yes, also Canada, of course, they're one of our like the border of the U.S. and Canada is one of the longest borders that's been in like good standing during its entirety. So yeah, I mean, obviously Canada is a very, very strong ally too. Let me look at some of the other questions. Chips from Taiwan are exempt. Okay, thank you for that, Eason. Um, don't apply to chips. Okay, so that actually makes a lot of sense. Um, cool. Any final thoughts, Hamad, about this in terms of what do you think? What do you think is gonna, I guess, happen? I know that Pranay is said that it's kind of the companies that, or rather countries that play ball regarding maybe actually taking on some of our debt or buying some of our debt from us or what have you. But what do you think is going to happen in the next few months in terms of changes from these tariffs?
So I think just a couple of things, like on immediate impact. Once these things go into effect and those goods start making their way to the U.S. and have those tariffs applied to them, the you know the people that are going to get impacted in the United States are going to be lower income folks that used to be able to afford X and can no longer afford it because a U.S. made good for that same whatever that same good is that used to be imported and was at a lower price. The U.S. made good will simply rise to the price that the new imported value is going to be at, because that's just the way supply and demand works, right? There's no reason for a U.S. supply or U.S. Manufacturer to not charge the basically up to or right underneath that imported price at this point. And so those folks that used to be able to, and I used this I think a couple of talks ago, but anybody who used to be able to pay, $100 for a pair of sneakers that came in from overseas, and a U.S. version of that was 150. Well, that imported cost is now going to be, let's say, $154 for talk's sake. That U.S. one that was 150 is now maybe 153 because they know that they can do that, right? That's how that works. And so that person who used to be able to do $100 is not going to buy the 153 or the 154 for that matter. And so they'll be priced out, or if they have to price it, they'll have to make some hard choices about what they can afford and what they can't afford. So I think like out of the gate, just everyday people, like that's the impact. Does that make sense?
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. How do you think? I know that there's talks as well about, obviously, with all these price increases or presumably price increases, since a lot of this is going to be passed along to the consumer, that we believe is going to happen, just as you said in your example. U.S. inflation. Analysts are seeing that U.S. inflation is going to surge or increase at a very rate. What are your thoughts in terms of like what inflation will be over the next few months to a year?
Yeah, same thing. That is my understanding of how economics works. I'm not an economist, but I can tell you that this will start to increase inflation. And yes, Carmine, absolutely, U.S. manufacturers who don't have raw materials locally will need to purchase those materials from overseas, and those will be subject to tariffs as well. But they'll be subject at the raw material COGS, not the sales price. I was referring to the sales price, so that's why. But yeah, I think we're going to see inflation. I think we're going to see, a U.S. economy that starts to slow down even more until, some of these things, these policies change, or until these countries come to the table and negotiate with the U.S. and then pull those tariffs off and then can get back access to the U.S. market. It's a strategy. I don't know that it's the right one. I don't know that it's the wrong one, but it's a one. So,
Do you think, if, let's say, manufacturing in terms of the actual segments of the market that wants to return to the U.S. or even are introduced to the U.S., if that is successful, we're still, unless of course we source like raw ingredients and raw materials in the U.S., we probably will still see a global market when it comes to the actual sourcing raw materials and raw ingredients or products. If manufacturing, let's say like manufacturing is successful in some capacity, in terms of manufacturing jobs in the U.S., do you see a scenario where then we actually lift tariffs because we're sourcing raw ingredients, raw materials outside of the U.S. to actually benefit those companies? Or I know this is all kind of hypothetical. Just wanted to see if there is like a success that actually happens when it comes to manufacturing returning to the U.S. And I know that's really broad, but let's just say the segments of manufacturing that he wants or that we believe that we can own as in the U.S. Do you then see tariffs being like go away from to actually get more competitive when it comes to actually the actual raw ingredients or raw materials?
So yeah, I think that that's definitely a possibility because if you remember, during the first administration in Section 301, what ended up happening there were exemptions being made, right? And there were different phases of it when it was rolled out, and you could apply for your good to be exempted from those duties. And so the same thing could very well happen here is, look, we are an important company providing U.S. manufacturing, U.S. jobs, and so here's all of the things that we are doing to comply and take advantage of the U.S. Increasing U.S. manufacturing. But this one thing is simply not made in the U.S. We cannot find it here, and so we need to import it from country X. Can we get an exemption? That's definitely on the table. I think that that's definitely on the table. But at the same time, like if we believe that that's going to drive down the cost, I don't know, because the cost of labor in the U.S. is always higher than it is anywhere else, than a lot of other places, let's say. And we're talking about manufacturing that we're talking about like 5 years from now, right? We're like, this is not something that's happening tomorrow. But definitely something that could be, and it may be another administration's, on their list or in their burden to handle at that point.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you say, it sounds like it's going to happen overnight. Hamad, I thought that this was awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this was helpful. I believe we answered all the questions that kind of came through. We had a lot of awesome comments, and thank you so much for some of the feedback here. This has been really great. Hamad, thank you for your time. And I'm sure we're going to do a part 5 because there's always something new in the world of tariffs in 2025. So thanks so much for listening. We're MFD. And thanks so much for listening. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and apologies for the